Okay, so good morning, everybody. I think we are ready to begin this webinar today. We have with us approximately 75 people in the audience, and people will keep joining as we go along. So, first of all, I would like to start by thanking the MedGem team for putting together um, this fantastic, really, webinar on the occasion of the International Day of Clean Energy. So we talk about clean energy a lot these days, but I think the talk about green hydrogen is really innovative, and we really look forward to working together with MedGem to basically talk more about green hydrogen in the region and explaining it actually to begin with. So quickly to introduce myself, I am Jumana Brihi. I am the team leader of EU Neighbors South, which is the regional communication program of the European Commission. So our mission really is to communicate what the European Union is doing in the region on different fronts and in different sectors, and that is why we partner with regional programs like MedGem to bring to light what these amazing projects are doing in the region and the work that is happening on the ground. So today, this webinar will begin with a session to really demystify green hydrogen, really explain the notions there, and we are happy to have with us Mr. Frank Hooters from the MedGem network, Ms. Angie Park, who is currently working at the UNIDO, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and Maria Roger Torrent from Hydrogen Europe. So I leave you with this introduction, and thank you very much, everybody, for making it. And so I guess first famous words to Frank Hooters. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And thanks for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. And I would like to share my screen so that I can show you the slides that I actually made. So as Jumana already mentioned, our aim today is to, can you allow me to share my screen? So the idea is to, demystify, if you will, hydrogen. I do think there is a lot of, there's a lot of confusion, I would say. Can you see my screen now? Yeah, okay, good, all good. Always takes a bit of time. So there's a lot of confusion, and some say they call it the champagne of the energy transition, and we have to do renewables first and then hydrogen. I hope that after this presentation, you see that in a slightly different light. And I think it's important to always remind ourselves what is happening. And this is a recent picture of Spain. You've seen that, but I could have just as well shown you pictures of floods in Pakistan or Mozambique, or storms in Philippines or the United States. The fact is that the climate change is a reality. I was reading this week that last year was the hottest year on record. I think we've broken the 1.5 degrees Celsius already. But even though it was the hottest year on record, it will be the coldest year of the rest of your life. So that is something that we have to keep reminding ourselves, that this is also not something that is going to go away even if we close our eyes, and it's expensive. And to give you that, perspective, this is the emissions that we had last year, record number of emissions. We have 35 gigatons of CO2 emissions, even though, we all signed the Paris Accord and we're trying to improve somewhat. As humanity, we're not able to bend this curve enough. And there was a recent paper last year done by a Harvard scientist that estimated the social cost of carbon emissions, and that is actually more than $1,000. So that is what it costs. That is what these emissions cost in terms of premature deaths, in terms of the damaged infrastructure and all the costs that So as humanity, we take that for granted. We spend $35 trillion every year because we cannot stop emissions. So I think that is important to realize. And, obviously part of, let's say the stickiness of our waste, the fact that we cannot change it, is because, it's a big industry. The fossil fuel industry is about $3 trillion turnover in oil seals, about $1 trillion in natural gas, another trillion in coal. So that's a $5 trillion industry. But put that into perspective, $35 trillion of damage. And that is something that we have to work on. Now, there is good news. In the field of electricity, we have been doing quite well. This is, the trend of new additions globally. So in the electricity sector, the large majority of new additions have been for many years solar, wind, hydropower. And that is now 85 to 90%. And the reason for that is also relatively straightforward. If you look at the price, the cost range for fossil fuels, then both photovoltaics, onshore wind, but also geothermal and biomass are cheaper. And that is why this has accelerated and why we've been doing well in the field of renewables. But, we also have to remind ourselves that electricity is only one part of the energy puzzle. Now, then, if you look at, this is a picture I really like. If you buy 2 square meters of a window, it'll cost you $400. This is an American picture. But if you buy the same window, but you add solar cells, all of a sudden, miraculously, it's only a quarter of the price. So this has changed everything. Photovoltaics is now really cheap. And, that's why, it's been growing exponentially for years now, and that is not going to stop. So that's the good news. Last year, we started a piece of work trying to better understand storage, and I'll get into why this is important also for this webinar today. There are 3 reasons why you have storage. The first one is relatively straightforward. We all understand that there's a mismatch between supply and demand. Then there is anxiety, especially importing countries. We have strategic reserves, and that is the IEA, the OECD countries have 90 days of petroleum reserves. European Union, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, has similar things for natural gas. China is mandating coal reserves. So strategic reserves are there, and they are important. And thirdly, there is trade. I mean, people buy fossil fuels when they're cheap, they store them, and then they sell them when they're more expensive. And that all adds up to quite a substantial amount. We wanted to understand how much, and to my surprise, we didn't find a source. So the overall primary energy demand in the world is about 168,000 terawatt hours. And the large bulk of that is covered by oil. So 32% of our primary energy demand is still covered by oil, mostly for transport, but also to some extent for electricity and other things. Then comes coal, then natural gas, and then lastly, we also have electricity, 17%. The question we had was how much storage is in this global system. And as I said, we didn't find a source, not the IEA, not IRENA, not McKinsey. Nobody actually knew, so we had to do original research. And, we added up, all the oil reserves that were there, and that's about 10 billion barrels of oil in tanks onshore, floating offshore, in gas stations all over the world, in trucks and trains, etc. It's a huge amount. More than a quarter of oil that we use in a year is in storage somewhere. Coal, slightly less, but still more than a fifth. Natural gas, more difficult to store, but still 13%. And electricity, and this was the interesting one, hardly anything. Electricity, once you make an electron, it's very difficult and expensive to store. So this is all pumped hydro. I mean, we all know about batteries and how they're growing and important they are, etc., and they are, but they cannot be seen on the scales that we're looking at. On a global scale, it's completely insignificant. So we currently have 9.5 terawatt hours of pumped hydro, and the batteries are not even visible in that space. So then, if we look at storage overall, more than 20% of all the molecules that we use, which is the bulk of the energy carriers that we have, is in storage somewhere. So this was a lot more than we had actually thought. So then I asked AI, and I said, if I start with electricity storage as a golf ball, how big would the sphere be that, would be the rest of storage, which is a molecule. So you have a golf ball, and then it's actually a huge glass ball that can even hold the atomium in Brussels. And I have exaggerated the size of the golf ball. You wouldn't even see it. So in terms of storage, it's molecules, molecules, and more molecules. And why does that matter? Well, the thing is that we've seen how we can expand the use of electricity. That is what we're doing. We're making more and more clean electricity, and we're also using electricity for more and more things. And then how can that work if you only store 0.03% of electricity? And the reason is that still in the current electricity system, 60% of electricity generated using molecules. We burn coal, we burn natural gas, a little bit of oil, and that supports our 30,000 terawatt hours of electricity demand. So even there, even though it's getting cleaner and cleaner, the molecules still support that electricity system. We have storage there that is, guaranteeing supply. It reduces price shocks. All the reasons why we have storage, it's in the molecules, and they also support the electricity system. Then we, looked at, okay, this is the current situation. What will it be if we have a clean situation, let's say latest by 2050, when we have no emissions, etc. And then it looks roughly the same, and we reduce the overall demand somewhat. I mean, these numbers were taken from the IRENA's World Energy Transition Outlook. Storage roughly the same, but they have to be clean molecules. The percentage of electricity storage will go up from 0.03% to 0.05%. So we still have 2,000 times more storage in molecules than in electricity. So batteries will grow exponentially, but we still need molecules. If we don't clean up the molecules, we'll still have emissions. I think that is the bottom line. And what do we learn from this, and why is it relevant for the Mediterranean region, which is the focus of the MedGem network? It is because the molecules actually, they guarantee a secure, safe, and cost-effective energy system. There is a limit to, for example, what Europe can do with wind turbines and solar. First of all, the more you do them, the more space it takes. It's not Europe just doesn't have enough space to be fully self-sufficient. So you will look at imports. It's also declared target. And then the question is how much, how do you do that? And that will be largely with molecules. Electrification is important. 50% is sort of the maximum. That is what everybody agrees on, whether it's EIA or IRENA. And storage, again, it's molecules, molecules, molecules. And they do guarantee also trade in a cost-effective way and in a secure way. And hydrogen in that sense is indispensable. It's not a nice to have, it's something that the system needs. I don't see how you can do it in any other way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank. So I think now I don't know if you want to open the floor for any interventions, but I think we're leaving that to the end, right, Raya? So now we have Angie Park joining us from UNIDO. Angie, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Also, I wanted to just commemorate the International Day of Clean Energy. So happy International Day of Clean Energy. My name is Angie Park. I'm stepping in for Ms. Petra Schwager. And today I'm going to give a brief overview on UNIDO's work and kind of elaborate on how we could further support the clean energy transition with green hydrogen. So I hope you could see my screen, and I'll just start the presentation. So from UNIDO's end, we have the Global Program for Hydrogen Industry. And as Frank, our previous speaker, has clearly stated, there is multiple opportunities. Particularly, UNIDO focuses on working with developing countries and emerging economies because we want to leave no one behind in this process. And just reiterating the fact that clean hydrogen is indeed the key lever to decarbonizing the hard-to-abate industries. And beyond this, we want to also achieve how we could support industrialization efforts in the developing countries that we work with. So as everyone may be aware, it's a very complex undertaking to really ramp up the clean hydrogen landscape. And of course, we would be in need of the appropriate policies and regulations, the relevant standards to enable and facilitate global trade, the skills and know-how and innovation of hydrogen technology systems and equipment and infrastructure. And of course, to actualize these efforts, we would need the relevant financing to incentivize the investments in hydrogen projects. And most importantly, we would like to emphasize the need for global coordination with the key stakeholders at across institutional levels. So for these reasons, UNIDO set up the global program for hydrogen industry, and this is mainly established with a two-pillared approach where we have the global partnership angle, liaising with the key stakeholders, facilitating dialogue, and also developing joint projects with our partnerships. And this kind of feeds into technical cooperation where we work specifically with country-specific interventions. And I would like to elaborate a little bit on these two approaches. So mainly in the global partnership, we have a number of partners that we work closely with. Our partnership is also set up with multiple donors, so it's a multi-donor partnership angle. And we also develop diverse knowledge products, which I'm happy to also elaborate further into this presentation. In the technical cooperation side, as I mentioned before, this is a country level undertaking. So it will be obviously very adhered to country specific context on what are the country's needs and what kind of specific projects we can support to support the industrialization and also support domestic industries within the emerging economies and developing countries that we work with. So within our division, we have multiple initiatives that we're working on in each thematic area. If I go into illustrating some specific examples, in the case of policy, we work closely with the International Renewable Energy Agency and IDOS. We have developed a green hydrogen policy toolkit serving developing countries for standards with the International Organization for Standardization. We're cooperating to support the development of an international standard for hydrogen, which is based on the greenhouse gas emissions in hydrogen production. And we are also working closely with World Bank and the UK Hydrogen Breakthrough Agenda to support the financing mechanisms. We have developed the first global review of financial and technical assistance initiatives for clean hydrogen in developing countries, and this is now followed up with a second review process. In terms of skills, with the German development agency, the GIZ, and Hydrogen Europe, a methodology was developed to assess the skills gap along the hydrogen value chain in developing countries. If I'm not mistaken, this will be applied in particularly the Mediterranean region, so that would have quite some relevance to today's discussion. For innovation, with the UK, with the UK government, we are focusing on accelerating clean hydrogen relevant innovations in developing countries. So last year, UNIDO also assumed the role of secretariat to the UK Brazil Hydrogen Hub, which is a bilateral partnership where we support the country platform established between UK and Brazil. And we're basically supporting the mobilization of international technical and financial assistance. And there will be a primary focus around supporting the green hydrogen industrial clusters that are identified in the country. For trade corridors, this is something that our previous speaker also mentioned of high importance. UNIDO serves as the Secretariat of the International Hydrogen Trade Forum. And sustainability, we work closely with a broad coalition of stakeholders, including UN agencies and international organizations, development finance institutions, and we're currently quite ready to set out the guidelines for sustainable hydrogen projects in developing countries. And last but not least, to highlight on the gender angle, we have a very close partnership with the Women in Green Hydrogen. We're working on global awareness raising activities, but I believe it's also important that we can really set off the impact also in developing countries, emerging economies, so that we can perhaps actualize this through projects and these technical interventions. Yes, so one, as I mentioned before, as part of the ISO partnership with UNIDO, guide on the ISO TS 19870 has been published. And I believe there is a webinar tomorrow that will also explore the global standard for hydrogen greenhouse gas emissions assessment. This is developed by UNIDO in partnership with ISO, with the support from IPHE, the Hydrogen Council, and Hydrogen Europe. And it's the guide is purposed to make this ISO TS 19870 more accessible to industry professionals and government stakeholders. And it is not intended to be a standalone document, but it will be rather further supporting the methodology so that countries and industry practitioners can adapt these technical specifications in their industrial processes, and also apply this so that this can also lead to benefiting and enabling trade of hydrogen. Speaking of trade, we also have the International Hydrogen Trade Forum, as I mentioned before. This is a unique forum or platform where we aim to have high-level ministerial dialogue on cross-border trade in hydrogen and its derivatives. It's mainly in the level of ministers and CEOs of leading companies, and the dialogues will serve in discussing how we can tackle these key barriers, enablers for cross-border trade. And yes, these are the following countries that are part of the membership this year. The forum is co-chaired by the government of the Netherlands and Brazil. I also brought this slide mainly to kind of emphasize on what we do closely with the Southern Neighborhood countries. So in the case of Morocco, there is a GCF Green Climate Fund readiness project, which focuses on enhancing the enabling environment to support decarbonization of Moroccan steel production through the application of green hydrogen. So mainly we're looking to first support the government in testing and also understanding the feasibility of green hydrogen applied in this specific industrial process. And we also cooperate closely with the Ministry of Energy Transition and Sustainable Development, IRISN, and Maghreb Steel. So we're bringing in multiple stakeholders together to kind of examine this process. And ultimately, this is kind of delivered through capacity building training sessions. And we want to also scale this readiness project into to access larger scale financing. And I'm mainly overseeing the project in South Africa. And of course, this is a little bit out of the regional scope, but perhaps I just wanted to emphasize that there are some ongoing efforts. And of course, this is more contextualized to the specific countries we work with, as I mentioned before. In the case of South Africa, which is also quite rich in the national hydrogen strategies and policies, there we are aiming to establish a national hydrogen center. And of course, we want to also support the scale-up efforts of Identified Pipeline Project, where we will be cooperating closely with Airport Company South Africa to decarbonize heavy-duty transport with green hydrogen. These are our global knowledge products that were developed, so please give it a look. These are the countries of engagement, so it's quite spread out into a more global portfolio. But of course, there is also Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Egypt, where quite relevant to this regional scope. In the case of Algeria and Tunisia, we are also looking into developing a report on the South H2 corridor, and this is in cooperation with the Alliance for Industry Decarbonization, which is led by IRENA. And there is a working group dedicated to green hydrogen, which is chaired by SNAM. So obviously we're working with such international organizations and industries to kind of observe how the South H2 corridor report can further lead into potential developmental projects or address specific capacity needs. So those are some ongoing efforts as well. And we also have the Global Environment Facility, GEF8 Global Clean Hydrogen Program. In this program, we work with 9 countries. And here, this is where Algeria and Egypt are also partaking in. And this program will basically address all the institutional capacity needs, support the policy angle, also advance the technological readiness, and For Egypt and South Africa, that's quite advanced in these efforts, I would say. We are also dedicating a project component to look into financial mechanisms, and this will ensure the successful uptake of green or clean hydrogen in the countries that we work with. Lastly, we also have the International Hydrogen Energy Center based in Beijing. The IHEC is a critical knowledge partner to UNIDO and our global program initiative on hydrogen. And IHEC was set up in conjunction with UNIDO and the government of China. And it functions as a technology innovation hub that supports the creation of hydrogen value chains, R&D, and looking into key hydrogen technologies. We believe this can also trickle down into or trickle across into a global network of international hydrogen energy centers. So we're currently identifying some countries that would be interested and have similar scope of R&D innovation as well. Yes, so this is quite an overview, and just to wrap up, I would just like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to showcase UNIDO's ongoing work, and we'll be happy to answer any questions, best to my knowledge, after all the speakers. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for highlighting those benchmarks from all the countries. Very interesting. Just a quick note before we move on to our next speaker to make sure everybody sees we have a Q&A section there. So you can drop your question in there in writing. We are trying to answer them as we go along. And if anything is still pending in the end, we will answer everything. So I see some raised hands. Please don't hesitate to ask the question in the relevant section. So moving on now to our next speaker, Maria Rojo Torrent from Hydrogen Europe, Director of Trade and International Relations. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jumana, for having us on the occasion of the International Day of Clean Energy. Maybe as a starter, a word on what is Hydrogen Europe for those that are a little bit less familiar with our association. Hydrogen Europe represents the European hydrogen industry across the value chain, from production to the different end users. We have 600 members, mainly companies, but we're gathering also 30 national associations and 30 regions. Our vision is to propel carbon neutrality through hydrogen. If our initial focus has been to work on the leverages to develop a competitive European value chain, it's clear that in the long term, Europe will also need hydrogen imports in order to meet its objectives, and that also the European knowledge that we are now developing will be very relevant, or could be very relevant, for countries that are looking into developing equally an hydrogen economy. We are therefore, as Hydrogen Europe, working with countries with the stakeholders in non-European countries, companies, third country associations, and also international organizations like UNIDO that are fostering also partnerships with EU country partners. In this context, the cooperation with the South Mediterranean is clearly very high in Hydrogen Europe agenda. And if you had the opportunity to participate in the last European Hydrogen Week that took place in November in Brussels, you certainly saw that there was an increase of South Mediterranean delegations and also discussions around the hydrogen cooperation across the Mediterranean. Now, the objective of my presentation was to what should we do in order to make green hydrogen accessible. But I think that before addressing this particular topic, it would be interesting to further elaborate on why it's important to make it accessible. And in this, I would like to align with Frank's presentation and with Angie's presentation, who have been quite clear about it and about the hydrogen potential. First of all, clean hydrogen deployment can really help reduce time to decarbonization in line with the Paris ambitions. Hydrogen can indeed decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors where direct electricity use is quite limited. We're talking here about sectors like steel, cement, maritime, and aviation, to just mention some of them. And as you know, these sectors generate important shares of greenhouse emissions globally and very important for the economies. Second, clean hydrogen has other merits like strengthening energy security and also competitiveness of the industry, not only by making it sustainable, but also by providing new opportunities through the manufacturing of hydrogen techs or the manufacturing of hydrogen embedded products. And this is valid for all the economies, for Europe and also for the countries of South Mediterranean and other countries that might be having also an interest in hydrogen developments and hydrogen production potential. So hydrogen will not make it all, but it's one of the vectors to achieve climate neutrality and is complementary to a renewables-based energy system. Now, what is the situation in relation with the access to clean hydrogen? You know that for the past years, there have been many countries that have adopted or considered hydrogen strategies, roadmaps. There is no exception in the South Mediterranean, nor in Europe. Even in Europe now, we are let's say, orientating towards the review of the European hydrogen strategy that was adopted in 2020. There are many projects in the pipelines based on these strategies and roadmaps, but delivery is taking time. Very few projects have so far reached FID stage. In 2024, if we take it from a global perspective, just a small minority, around 7% of announced global clean hydrogen projects have taken positive final investment decisions. Still, we can say that we have started seeing also a slight acceleration end of 2024 in some geographies, which means the following: deployment is happening despite global headwinds, but clean hydrogen is not yet completely accessible, neither in quantity nor on price, to fulfill its promise. In many cases, we can even say that hydrogen deployment is lagging behind the political ambitions and regulatory objectives. Concerning the situation in Europe, we can say that things are moving. There is a clear improvement, and the numbers in Europe speak for themselves. End of 2024, Europe featured 223 operational clean hydrogen production projects with a production capacity of 98 kilotons per year, and had also 84 projects under construction or under FID, totaling 576 kilotons per year. This means that Europe production capacity of clean hydrogen is improving and had a steady growth through 2024, averaging 7 kilotons per year per quarter. Another element that I would like to underline is that operational hydrogen projects for the moment remain still quite small scale, but projects under construction are getting larger. All this is very positive indeed, but the reality is that we are still lagging behind the objectives that have been settled at European level. For instance, when we're talking about projects that are operational and under construction for water electrolyzers, they total 0.31 million tons per year, whereas by 2030 you would need at least 8.85 million tons per year to meet the RED III targets. And if you're considering the impact assessment of the European Commission for the 2040 targets, you would even need 3.1 million tons. So this means that the operational and the under construction projects for water electrolyzers represent only 16% and 10%, depending on the case that you're looking, of the minimum required by 2030. So all this opens clearly a very nice opportunity also for hydrogen imports. So this is something, this is a learning that we can take. But at the same time, it shows that we really need to accelerate hydrogen deployment quite urgently. In this process, the accessibility of hydrogen is very much linked to two elements. First of all, being able to scale the whole ecosystem, scaling up production, scaling up also uptake of hydrogen to create market via offtake agreements, and also scaling up infrastructure to link production and demand of hydrogen. but transportation here of hydrogen remains a very costly factor. We're talking here also then about money. And money is also very key when it comes to hydrogen production. Our challenge is to lower the green premium between clean and fossil hydrogen. And as you know already, the cost of electrolyzer capex and power prices are very high for the moment in Europe, which currently makes the economic case very challenging without subsidies. So in this context, the state aid support is very much needed to de-risk also private investments and also to call access to capital markets. This is also very important in this initial stage of the hydrogen economy, knowing that public funding will only cover a very limited share of what will be needed. We can say that in Europe a lot has been done in the last years in relation with many of the leverages that you need to make hydrogen accessible. We have consumption targets. There is a definition of FMBOs. There has been the first option and even now a second option of the European Hydrogen Bank to support hydrogen production. All these have been very key in the initial steps, but we need now to go to the next level. Conscious of the many challenges that require a holistic approach, Hydrogen Europe has published a few days ago a paper called A Clean Industrial Plan for the European Hydrogen Industry. This paper is not only focused on what Europe needs to do from a European perspective. It's also of interest to our international partners, as also addresses the international dimension of European policies and the synergies that we want to develop with them. This paper underlines that in order to accelerate hydrogen deployment, we need to work on 4 main leverages. First of all, ensuring affordable energy and access to raw materials. Here, I would like to put the focus on accelerate the deployment of renewables because as it's known, cost of electricity accounts 60%, for instance, of electrolytic hydrogen production. So this is something that needs to be addressed. And then also, as part of the objective of ensuring affordable energy, we are counting on the design of EU strategies for hydrogen imports. And here again, the Mediterranean holds a very strategic position, which is also recognized in the new European Commission by the appointment of a new commissioner dedicated to the relations with the Mediterranean. The objective also for the new European Commission to establish a new partnership with the Mediterranean, which we hope will also cover hydrogen cooperation. And I must say that hydrogen cooperation is not new. As you know, in the previous term, there were many MOUs that were signed between the European Union and several South Mediterranean countries, and that there were also several cross-border initiatives like the South Edge Corridor that were launched. But it's about going to the next step, and having a more holistic approach towards all this potential cooperation. Second leverage is about simplifying regulatory frameworks to foster growth. And here, the focus will be very much on the compliance of the RED III objectives in the member states. These are the ones that are going to create market and give security to producers and also to importers. As part of this priority, we would like also to submit the adaptation of the RFMBO Delegated Act. The objective is to make it more workable at European level, but also for importing countries. Third leverage is about the stimulation of demand for EU sustainable products. The objective is to incentivize offtake of green products and stimulate demand in lead markets. Here it's about maybe steel, but also low carbon fertilizers. And this is an agenda that we can work together also with the South Mediterranean countries. Finally, in the international sphere, we want to make sure that hydrogen is traceable and tradable. So working together also with South Mediterranean countries in developing international hydrogen certification schemes is something that we are putting also in our agenda. Finally, from a more cross-cutting perspective, there are 2 points that we would like also to address in the upcoming European term. Skills, because hydrogen, we know, can create jobs, and we need to adapt also the qualifications of people working in the energy sector so that they can be adapted to the needs of the hydrogen sector. And then the question of funding and financing, which is cross-cutting. Here, developing the European Hydrogen Bank, strengthening it with further funds is going to be the key. And we hope also that in this context, its international leg will be developed. We will be having a very close look at the pilot mechanism that the European Commission will be putting into place by mid-2025 to match offer and demand. And when it comes to the supply, it will be supplied both coming from the European Union and also from outside the EU. And then as part also of the financing part, we would like to make sure that the Connecting Europe facility supports adequately the hydrogen infrastructure, not only within the European Union, but also in the connection with the South Mediterranean. I have been mentioned before, and also you needed it, the South Edge Corridor. So I think that this is very important, but we have to encompass also in this concept the port infrastructure that is going to receive supplies of hydrogen and derivatives. So as you can see, the international cooperation is very important in the leverages to make hydrogen accessible into the European Union. And Hydrogen Europe, as mentioned in the introduction, is very keen to continue working and enhancing our cooperation with our Mediterranean partners in a common agenda for the next term. Thank you very much for your attention. Again, thank you very much for having me here today. I'm very glad to answering the questions you might have by the chat or bilaterally after the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you, all of the panelists for these introductory remarks. Now, we do have a few questions in the chat, and we're going to take 3 to 4 of them before we move on to the next one. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read out the questions, unless the people asking the questions prefer to ask them out loud. But so we have Firas, we have Bushra, we have Tala, so I will address these to our dear panelists. First of all, Firas, who says he is the founder of a co-creation movement. I am wondering about the success stories and the most advanced countries that have managed to move forward and reap the benefits of hydrogen in the industrial landscape. Did it happen without government subsidy? What about the hydrogen infrastructure? So I leave it to, I guess, anybody who has an answer to that among our speakers.
I am happy to give it a start. I think it's also fair to say that if you're really looking for, let's say, success stories, then we also have to realize that it's still early days. I mean, we're starting with the hydrogen story, and it's a little bit a matter of where do you start. So we do know that there is a huge amount of potential projects that know where and how to make hydrogen. But in terms of infrastructure that connects, for example, the off-takers to the to the producers, that is all work in progress. And there's a huge amount of work, for example, in my original home country, the Netherlands, being done by the Port of Rotterdam, which has a very strong hydrogen vision with import terminals, distribution connection, all kinds of conversion stories, as well as production and use cases. And there is many of those. In the southern Mediterranean, Morocco has been looking at hydrogen. They issued the Offre Maroc last year, which lays the foundation for the hydrogen strategy. But if you're really looking for, let's say, success stories, I think we'll probably have to wait a number of years before we can actually say, okay, this was really, let's say, a winning approach how to do it. But there's a huge amount of activity ongoing in both Europe as well as North Africa and the Middle East. Would also like to remind people of, for example, the brilliant work that the Oman is doing. It's not part of the Mediterranean, but it's close by, and they've really embraced hydrogen, from a holistic perspective. So they've actually taken, a national approach whereby, they are building common infrastructure in terms of a hydrogen backbone, in terms of water desalination plants. They have an auction system for sites for the producers. They're connecting to off-takers elsewhere, but also inside the country. And that is the type of approach that we're now seeing other countries looking to copy, whether that's Morocco, whether that's Mauritania, or even Jordan. Many people are looking at the approach that Oman is taking. But, also in Europe, there is plenty of such examples.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Frank. Another question from Bushra there. Two questions actually from Bushra. The first one, since the energy storage percentage only increases marginally from 0.03 to 0.05% after integrating hydrogen alongside battery systems, this variation sounds insufficient to efficiently match energy supply with demand. Consequently, is this observation fair enough to consider hydrogen as a complementary storage solution besides batteries, rather than a radical promising solution?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question and a great observation. That's actually the same conclusion that we arrived at, because the 0.05% is actually taking the IEA predictions for the amount of batteries that we will have in 2050, which is 27 terawatt hours. I mean, that is after exponential growth of batteries. Batteries will be much bigger than pumped hydro. But it's still, by several thousand times not enough to support a functioning energy system. And the fundamental flaw in let's say, in all the models is that they don't look at the storage sufficiently enough. We talked to all the modelers, whether they were from BP or IRENA, the IEA, etc. You ask them how much storage you have in your model. First, they need a couple of days to look into it, so it's not really, front of their agenda. And then secondly, it's a small number because it's a technical number and it doesn't take into account the trade volumes and the volumes that we have in strategic reserves. And those are important also to supply or to secure a guaranteed supply and make it cost effective. So part of the trade story also has to do with that storage element. So I do think, looking at it from this perspective, yes, we will have a lot more electricity, but that needs to be backed up by molecules. We cannot battery our way out of emissions. If we don't do clean molecules, we will have emissions. I think that is the bottom line. Without molecules, I don't see a solution. The numbers just don't add up. So we need to look at cleaning up the molecules, and hydrogen is, of course, a clean molecule. I think that's the bottom line.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you, Bushra, for this indeed very important question, and Frank for your detailed answer. I think now we need to move on to our next panel, but I will ask our speakers to try to answer as many questions as possible from the chat, because we do have several now that have come in. And I also encourage, please, everybody with raised hands to type your question in the chat to make sure it is answered.